Hello everyone and welcome to At Home with Abby. Thank you all so much for being here for this week's video. It is Mardi Gras this week and we are heading into Lent. So I want to do a little video where I cook a pretty traditional festive Mardi Gras meal. Every week we do a home church with my family and usually my aunt will cook a whole meal. This week I decided to give her a break. Since it was Mardi Gras, I said, okay, I'm gonna bring a big jambalaya and a king's cake for the whole group. Turns out tripling the recipe and making a king's cake at the same time in one morning is kind of difficult. So you will see the chaos behind this video. Now I made both of these dishes at the same time, but just for clarity's sake, I split it up in the video to show you how I made the jambalaya and show you how I made the king's cake separately. Just know that this was all a big sort of jumbled mess where basically from 6 to about 9:30 when we had to head out, we were cooking. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you all so much for joining. And let me know if you try these recipes for your Mardi Gras. Let's go. All right, let's start off with walking through the jambalaya recipe first. I will list all the amounts and things in the description or the links to the recipe so you can reference it yourself. But just know that I tripled this recipe, which always makes me a little nervous because you got to do some math. But we started up by cutting all of our kielbasa sausage and getting our ham out of its packaging and browning all of that up for 8 to 10 minutes each with hot oil in the bottom of the pan. As you can see, I unwrapped a brand new stock pot the morning that I started cooking this. It turned out that, I just got it just for normal everyday life because I wanted to replace my pot that I have now with stainless steel. But this worked out perfectly because I upgraded to a much bigger one and it wouldn't have fit in any other pot that I had. So definitely need a huge pot for this. Here's what the meat looks like as it's starting to brown. You're technically supposed to do them separately, and I kind of misread it and did them together. It still worked out just fine. After that, I started cutting up all of the celery and the bell peppers, which when you're tripling this recipe, it is going to be a lot of cutting. And honestly, I probably should have done this the night before. I was thinking about it and just didn't get around to it. So here's a little time lapse of me just cutting all the onions, the bell peppers, and the celery. If I did not have that slap chopper that I'm cutting with in this video, I would not even make this recipe. It's so much cutting, and if I did not have a tool to help me, it would have taken probably like triple the time to cut, or way more than that actually. So I will link that in my description because it's so useful. I am also a big fan of garlic, and I needed to use 9 cloves of garlic, so that would have also taken me a long time to actually mince up myself. The next thing to add was our herbs. So I used oregano and thyme fresh, peeled those off the stems and cut them up, and then added those all to the pot. All right, coming up is where we had a few mix-ups. So you have to add tomato paste and chicken stock. Now it says 6 cups of chicken stock, and I was gonna use some leftovers from mine and 1 box that I had. This is where I realized it was all going wrong because I needed to triple the recipe. So I needed 18 cups of chicken stock. Anyway, I used my frozen leftover and then 2 boxes of vegetable broth. As I was bringing these to a boil, I realized I completely forgot rice and had to drive to the store at about 9 o'clock. So here's my real-time commentary on that whole fiasco. Okay, I'm just gonna record this really quick as I'm driving, so I'm not gonna really look at you. I realized I had no rice. I thought I had a gigantic bag of rice still. So right as I needed to bring my jambalaya to a rolling boil and then add the rice, I realized I have no rice. So I had to run to the store. I think I caught it in literally the nick of time. I gotta go home, dump the rice in, bring it to a boil, and then simmer it for like 20 minutes. Then you add shrimp into the mixture, but it's once you take it off of heat. So then that steams for like 15 minutes. So hopefully we can get, the rice added, bring it up to a boil, cook down the liquid, and then as we put it in the car, like right before we put it in the car to bring over to the gathering, hopefully I can just stick the shrimp in so it steams in the car. I think that's gonna be the move. Hopefully we're no more than like 10 minutes late. Technically, if it all works out, you're supposed to simmer for like 20 minutes. I did triple the recipe though, so the timing didn't work as well as I thought. And really, the breakdown was the chicken stock, because if I had realized I needed 16 cups of chicken stock or 18 cups instead of 6, I wouldn't have had to put frozen chicken stock, and that like slowed down the whole boiling time and all of that. So I don't know. I think we're gonna be okay, but it's tough. While I was on my way home, my husband added the meat back in so that could warm up. And then we added chives. I added the rice in as soon as I got home, and it actually came to a boil much quicker than I thought it was going to be. So it all turned out pretty much as planned. It came up to a boil. We cooked it for 20 minutes. The liquid started coming out. And then right before we got in the car, we stuck the shrimp in to steam. And it all actually ended up turning out great. That picture of the jambalaya actually has a little bit more liquid than what ended up being there. Like, we probably boiled it for 5 more minutes past that picture. So just leave a little bit of liquid, but not a crazy amount. Okay, on to the king's cake. I got out all the ingredients that I needed. And one of the first steps with a yeast dough is to get room temperature milk and yeast and mix them together. My milk was ice cold from the fridge, so I just put it on the stove for a couple minutes, and once it was room temperature, put it into a bowl and added my yeast. In preparation of the next couple steps, I was having my butter get melted in the air fryer behind me so that I could start creaming together the sugar, the salt, and the melted butter in the stand mixer. But my butter came straight from the fridge, so I had to melt it first. Now, it specifically says to mix these ingredients in a bowl that attaches to a stand mixer so that you can cream them all together. But when you put the dough hook on, which it says to attach, and you start mixing, the dough hook doesn't even reach the amount of liquid. So I just had to mix that part by hand. By the time I added my eggs, it did end up reaching the dough hook, or the dough hook ended up reaching the liquid, so it did mix it adequately. But for that first step, you might have to hand mix it. I then added the vanilla. You can also, at this point, add onion and lemon zest, which I didn't. I just spilled the milk all over the counter. Now, I needed to add 4 cups of flour, and my son was playing in the sink with my cup measure, so I had to add 8 half cups of flour, and I totally lost count. So I didn't want to go back and look at the footage. I just kind of guessed where I was, and once I kind of eyeballed like that the dough was creating a ball and coming off the sides and climbing up the dough hook like they mentioned in the recipe to look for, I knew that it was ready. So at this point, I oiled up the bottom of the bowl, formed the dough into a ball, and then covered it and let it rise for about an hour. It said to do an hour and a half, but I did put this in the oven with the light on so that it would speed up the process a little bit, because it said that this whole recipe took about 3 hours and 15 minutes, and that's exactly how much time we had. I wanted to buy myself a little bit of time because things always seem to take longer. So I put it in the oven with the light on to warm it up, and it worked. About an hour later, it had doubled in size. An hour later, I rolled out the dough on a floured surface, and it said to knead it for 10 minutes. My arms got exhausted after just a few minutes, so I did not last very long. It definitely did not last 10 minutes. I probably kneaded it for about 4. I let it rest for a little bit and started mixing the sugar and cinnamon filling, and then I tried to roll out the dough. This was really hard. It says to roll it into a big oblong shape. And this is where the pictures are going to come in handy. You're supposed to have a very, very long rectangle, which I tried here. You can see it's pretty long, but it just wasn't cooperating that much, the shape of it. I wanted it even longer. But anyway, I forged ahead, brushed it with my vegetable oil, and then drizzled my cinnamon sugar recipe on top, spread it out. And then for this recipe, even though I've seen a lot of king's cakes where you just roll it up like a cinnamon roll and then make it into a wreath, this one called to cut it into 3 long pieces and braid it. And this is where it was to my detriment that my pieces weren't very long, because it gets very hard to braid. So I tried to stretch them out. I tried to stretch each piece as I was braiding them, but really I probably should have just let the dough rest a little bit longer, which it doesn't call for in the recipe, but I think that would have helped. and then rolled out the dough into a longer shape so that when I folded it, the pieces were longer. Because when the braid is this short and I tried to make it into a wreath, the ends had a hard time connecting. So just a longer shape would have helped, because you can see those little ends are having a hard time sticking together. But overall, it looks pretty good. The braid looks pretty nice. And so I got started with the cream cheese filling. Another very confusing part of this recipe is that the cream cheese filling isn't actually a filling at all. It goes on top. I don't know if that's standard for a king's cake recipe, or if if it's because I'm not from Louisiana or something that I didn't understand. Filling to me implies it goes in the middle, but you actually just pipe a ring of it along the top, and it says you could definitely have leftover, which I did. But I popped that into the oven for 12 minutes. I'll recap kind of the fiasco and why it should have been longer. But here's how it turned out. Then you add just regular icing, powdered sugar and milk icing, and I added some sprinkles on top. We then packed everything in the car. We wrapped the big pot in a towel so it wouldn't burn my legs, and we were off. We are home from home church. It was a great success. I'm gonna give you a little recap as I clean the kitchen, because let me show you the aftermath of making this meal. This is my kitchen counter right now. We did not have time to clean it before we left. So like I said, this was a huge hit. Now I've probably mentioned in this video by now at this point that I tripled the recipe, which it was a lot. I get really nervous doing like a huge batch of something, like tripling the recipe, just because I feel like the math can go wrong sometimes and things don't turn out well, or I don't know, we don't boil it long enough. This was the perfect consistency, perfect texture. We were on that huge time crunch, but we made it. We made it 10 minutes late, which is not bad. And everyone loved it. Everyone took a bunch of leftovers home. So it felt very, very successful. I really couldn't have asked for anything more. It was delicious. I think sometimes I tend to over boil it, or boil it just a tad too long so that there's absolutely no liquid before I add the shrimp. This time we got close to no liquid, but we let some be in there. And I think the texture was actually the best I've ever made. So I would recommend just not getting every single bit of liquid out, just leave a tiny bit when you steam it for the shrimp, because it was perfect. Now the king's cake, we had some hiccups. Looked gorgeous, looked awesome. The decorations were great. It said to cook it for 12 to 15 minutes. Usually with my oven, I go, I guess, kind of in the middle, but this time I decided to go 12 minutes because we were on a time crunch. And I kind of saw that it was like a little jiggly, and I just didn't think enough about it, I guess. We also put it in our bottom oven, which is not the convection oven. That's our traditional oven, which I didn't even think about takes a little bit longer than our top oven. So I baked it for 12 minutes. It definitely should have gone longer. It was pretty much raw in the middle, but people did have a taste of like the outside, and it was very good. Also, I ordered a pack of baby Jesus figurines, or like the little baby figurines to put in there. And I totally forgot the step about putting the figurine in the cake. So when we got there, we shoved this like little figurine in the cake, and then someone found it. But I did it like after the fact instead of how you're supposed to do it. There are still baby Jesuses sitting on my front porch right now. So make sure the middle is to temperature, or that you're not getting any dough. It's not a big doughy mess. But other than that, 10 out of 10 across the board. The taste was amazing. The recipe, which I've also probably mentioned in a voiceover, was a bit confusing. So just look at the pictures on the recipe if you followed this particular recipe. I thought it was a great king's cake. But next year, I will bake it a bit longer. I'm gonna pack up these leftovers. There's still like a good amount of leftovers, even with my whole family taking a bunch of leftovers for themselves. I'm excited to have this for lunch throughout the week. But that's all for this week's video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great Mardi Gras, a great Lent. If you like videos like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any homemaking or motherhood videos. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye everyone.